So Samsung Electronics labor union decided to call off its strike after reaching a last-minute deal with management. And massive bonus payouts are now projected for Samsung workers, especially since its operating profit for the first quarter of this year jumped eightfold. For more on this, we're joined today by Professor Shim Myung-kyu, Associate Professor of Economics at Yonsei University. Professor Sim, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
So what were the main sticking points in the negotiations, and what impact could this agreement have on Samsung Electronics going forward?
Yeah, the last-minute agreement suggests that both sides, the firm and workers, were willing to avoid an escalation of the dispute, but it does not necessarily mean that all the underlying issues have been fully resolved. The main sticking points appear to center on raises, performance-based compensation, and broader issues of labor representation. From the union's perspective, there has been dissatisfaction with the bonus system, especially given recent fluctuations and the semiconductor earnings. On the other hand, management has been more cautious, emphasizing cost control during the period of uncertain business environment. So in this sense, the disagreement was not just about the level of pay, but also about how risk and rewards are shared between workers and the firm. In terms of the impact, the agreement helps remove immediate uncertainty and avoids potential disruptions to production and supply chains, which is positive news for both Samsung and for the broader economy, Korean economy. However, I would still say that the broader implications remain. These episodes reflect a gradual shift toward more active labor representation and changing expectations about compensations.
Right. And so what does this dispute reveal about changing workplace expectations in South Korea, like you just mentioned? And does the deal suggest that labor unions are gaining more leverage within Korea's tech sector?
I think the latest agreement does suggest that labor unions are gaining more visibility and also to some extent more influence in Korea's tech sectors. Compared to the past, employees in the large tech firms like Samsung are becoming more organized and more willing to voice their demands, particularly on issues like wages, bonuses, and transparency of the governance. However, I would not interpret this as kind of the sudden shift in the bargaining power, but rather as a part of the gradual change in the labor market. In terms of the workplace expectations, I think that this dispute highlights a broader transition. During the high growth period, many workers become accustomed to strong compensation and rising bonuses. But as growth has slowed and profits have become more volatile, companies are adjusting their compensation structures. This creates tensions between workers and the firms because workers' expectations, which are set at the high level, are adjusting more slowly than economic conditions. So overall, I would say that this is not just about unions gaining leverage, but about changing economic expectations and a more mature and in some ways more contested labor market environment.
I see. And what message do you think this agreement sends to foreign investors watching the labor relations in South Korea?
To me, the agreement sends a somewhat reassuring message to foreign investors and as well as the domestic investors, and less in the short term. And the fact that both sides were able to reach a deal at the last minute suggests that there is still a strong incentive to avoid the disruptions, especially in a company like Samsung that is really important at the global level. So in that sense, it helps reduce immediate uncertainty around the production and supply chains and the tech sectors, which is really a kind of the positive news from the investor's perspective. Also, the agreement appears to include a long-term framework for compensation and incentives extending to the next decade, which could also be seen as a positive signal in terms of stability and predictability. But I would also say that the investors will likely focus on broader trend rather than the single event. As I discussed earlier, labor relations in Korea's tech sector are evolving over time with greater emphasis on transparency and fairness of the payment system and the compensation structure. So the short-term signal is reassuring again, but the long-term takeaway is that the investors may need to pay closer attention to how labor relations are changing over time.
I see. And disputes over bonus payouts are now also emerging at other Korean tech firms like Kakao and Hyundai. So could you just briefly tell us how Samsung's wage agreement could influence labor disputes at other companies like Kakao and Hyundai?
Yeah, this dispute is not just a single isolated case at the individual firm, but it is kind of a broader shift in the Korean tech sector. In the recent years, many tech firms experienced rapid growth, especially during the pandemic, and after the pandemic too, the compensation rose significantly. But as the growth has slowed and profits have become more volatile, as I pointed out earlier, companies are becoming more cautious in how they structure performance-based pay. So based on the expectations of the workers that is shaped by their previous performance, they have different expectations, and that made the tension. Also, Samsung's agreement could also serve as a kind of the benchmark for other firms like Kakao and Hyundai, potentially encouraging employees to push for greater transparency and improve compensation structures as they have seen from this dispute. So I want to say these disputes are not just about the bonus themselves again, but about how expectations are adjusting and there's kind of slow growth, but facing greater uncertainty about the future.
I see. All right, Professor Shim, thank you so much for your time and insight this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.